All right, everybody, shalom and welcome to the Yishai Fleischer Show with Rav Mike Feuer. We're going to do the Torah portion of the week in just a second, but we're going to let everybody join up and say hello. This is a great time to comment and send a little shalom from wherever you are. We're going to have a lot of fun this Torah portion because this is one of the favorites for both myself and Rav Mike, and I'm very excited to hear from him. Rav Mike is with us. Shalom. And I'm on the ark, as you can see, the magic of doing
I still gotta get on board. I gotta get on board.
That's right. I'm feeling very arky right now, so I'm very excited. People are joining in, and please comment when you join in. That's right, archetypical. That's right. Are you excited, Rev Mike? We're gonna have a lot of fun with this half today, with this segment today.
I'm ready to launch out and see how it floats.
Okay. You're making a deluge of jokes around here today.
Oh.
That's right. But some of it is really, some of it is some of the trash that falls into the third floor. Okay, Raja says shalom from India, and my good friend Lou says shalom from Modin. Lou, as usual, you're in charge of volumes. Let me know if how you're seeing things and how things are sounding, and please let me know throughout the show if there's a volume difference. I'm really mystified by the challenge of how to know when your guest and yourself are at different volumes. Is there any kind of way? So Betty says shalom, and I'm very, very excited to be with you. And I think it's time for us to get on the way. So, shalom everybody, and welcome to the Yishai Fleischer Show, broadcasting live from Judea to the world. You're a part of it wherever you are. Shalom and welcome to our very special and beloved guest, Rav Mike Feuer. Rav Mike, shalom and welcome.
Shalom, Yishai. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you, and I'm really excited because this is one of my favorite Torah portions.
Don't say it.
It's true, though. It's one of my favorite Torah portions. It's just.
I know you mean it.
It's really iconoclastic. It is really an iconoclastic.
No, that's next week.
That's right. That's the iconoclast of Abraham. You're right. We'll talk about that next week. But this week we're talking about something that's so. It's iconic. That's the word. Thank you very much. You know what? I actually have to get up for a second from my chair and just reach on. Yeah, that's right. Wait for me here, everybody. I know. I'm covering up the
Whoa, he's breaking the third wall, the fourth wall.
You know what happened? I just looked over at my shelves, and I've got a lot of tchotchkes, and I just realized that I have this Lego watch, this rainbow Lego watch. So I'm going to take off my regular, like, IDF type watch and put on my my happy rainbow watch. Here.
Go to the happy place.
That's right. It's my happy place today, and that's what I'm going to wear for the rest of the week. This awesome Lego watch, because it's a happy place. It's like exactly.
I expect you to be posting pictures to Twitter of you in bizarre and political places wearing the rainbow Lego watch.
You see that I have been very active on Twitter in the last few days. I don't know why. A lot of different things have angered me and gotten me going. So we'll talk a little bit about that later on. Somewhere in here. Oh, when we talk about spilling the blood of man, we'll talk about that. I'll ask you about your thoughts on healing Saib Erekat, the PLO spokesman, who's right now in Hadassah and Karim in Jerusalem. In any case, let's actually talk about a righteous person for a second, and that is the righteous person of Noach. One of my real favorite verses, and I mean this very seriously, Rav Mike, one of my favorite verses in the whole Torah was in last week's Torah portion, which introduced Noach. And that is at the end of the Torah portion of Genesis, which is like the Torah portion of creation. It's like the world is being created. It's really very hopeful, right? God is making life happen, and he's making light, and he's making the stars and the heavens and the waters and the animals, and it's so beautiful, and everything says Ki Tov.
It's all good.
It's all good with the capital G. It's like the good of goods, right? It's like God is doing something because he's trying to do a gift to the world. A real, like the word good that really comes from the word God. It's like the ultimate goodness that God has ever done for us is giving us life and giving us creation. But then at the end of the Torah portion, there's disappointment. You know how they have in those PBS specials where like the worst thing you could do is disappoint your father. You know that one?
Missed that one, but I believe you.
You know, they're like, son, I'm really disappointed in you, and that's the most heartbreaking thing of them all, right? And so, at the end, at the end of the creation of Genesis, God is disappointed. It's like it's like it's not so good what he made after all. And the heart of man is just bad all day long. And it's like God seeks to destroy the world he created. There's no more powerful indictment than that.
Listen, it's a heavy moment. It's a heavy moment. The verse that you're speaking about, I assume, is here in chapter 5:29. Or are you talking about the original experience that God looks at the world and
yeah, God looks at the world and he's disappointed and he thinks to himself, let me destroy the world. And then there's this verse which I think is one of the most beautiful and maybe hopeful verses in the whole Torah, which is V'noach matzachen beinei Hashem. It's like, you know what? I want to destroy the world, but there's one thing that I do like. Something I like about it. And, you know, Rabbi Nachman will say things like, when you're angry at yourself, when you're disappointed, when you're bitter about the world, look for something that you like and in yourself. Find that little spot that you like about yourself. I have actually practiced this sometimes when I'm in a really bad mood. I just remember this now. Sometimes when I'm in a really bad mood, I look at just something physical that I like. It could be a car. It could be, I don't know, it could be a tree. And I just go, that is beautiful. And that's just an easy way to get yourself out of it. But the point is that Noach is this person that God's like, you know what, I like you, but what it means, like, maybe I'll keep the whole world alive because of you, or through you I'll keep the world alive. Like there is a hope, to quote Star Wars. You know, there's like a hope, and that's what Noach is. He's a messianic character because he's going to save the world from being totally destroyed, although the rest of the world is destroyed ostensibly. But there's a hope because there's a Noach, and that hope is going to later transcend through Abraham and the Jewish people. There's like a hope. There's like in the end, I wanted to get to this, but maybe I'll say it now. The ark, and I don't mean this kind of ark. I mean the boat ark. The ark of history is the Jewish people. That's this thing that throughout generations that finds favor in God's eyes, and the world keeps going because of that. What do you think about that?
I mean, I don't know how far you want to go with it. I mean, now the verse that you're speaking about in the Itzavon is this is it says V'yinachem Hashem ki asad adam ba'aretz, right? It's here in chapter 6, line 6, that God regretted, if we could be so bold as to translate it that way, making humanity on the land. V'yitatzev el libo, right? And now remember, the first appearance of Itzavon, God created. That it was in response to Adam and Chava and their eating from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But if you look back, the Etzav til Dibanim, right, the Itzavon comes into the world as the consequence of eating the fruit, but it's God's decision. And to a certain degree, there's a very deep theme in this where you see that creation is an unfolding divine thought. It's not that God doesn't know all. It's that there's an act of almost like divine self-exploration. Let's create humanity. Let's see how it works. Ooh, it's not going so well. That hurts. Hurts when your goal is to create a real creation that has its own independent relationship, and it doesn't go well. So, I mean, it's a beautiful image you're giving that Am Yisrael is the ark of history with a K. But remember that is bound up with a lot of pain.
Right.
It's not a neat arc with a C, meaning just the destruction that we're going to see in this week's parsha is a theme which will return, and in many ways, God's promise to never destroy the whole world again is not extended to Am Yisrael. Okay, he'll never destroy all of Am Yisrael, but you know, the destruction of the first temple, the destruction of the second temple, the Churban that our grandparents' generation lived through in Europe. These are very real reenactments of the destructive power when we fail in our mission or when we simply suffer. Because it's not. I don't know that it can always be traced to our actions. Right. So I don't know. This is it. You open up a big can of worms. Is what I'm basically saying.
Right. Well,
last week's parsha, I don't know.
Well, a can of worms is exactly what the ark itself is. The Noah's Ark. It's a can of worms. It's this can floating on top of the world. The world has been destroyed, and it contains with it the DNA, the information to reestablish the world. And I guess maybe if like you kind of threw out the Holocaust, the survivors of the Holocaust were the ones that kind of reestablished the Jewish world and then repopulated the land of Israel. But I want to actually your imagery of can of worms reminded me that there's also a component. There's like a sub discussion going on here, which is the discussion of science, the power of science. Sure. One of the things that Noach did in order to bring solace to the world is he actually had the ability to. He figured out the ability to use farming equipment to undermine some of the curse that the land was cursed with after.
He's the original John Deere. That's what I like to say.
Right. So he actually like brought technology, and that technology was, as promised in generations close to ours, was supposed to free us from some of the constraints that just survival cost us. So there was something beautiful about technology. It's interesting to me that also the thing that Noah uses in order to save the world is this ark. It's not prayer. It's not some kind of spiritual ethereal thing. It's like a very technological thing. You'll save it by building this boat. This boat is what you get on the physical boat. That's what's going to save you. And I've said to you in previous years that I have this like theory. It's more like I don't know if it's a theory. It's a fancy that really Noah is a great scientist, and he is keeping all the animals in status through like test tubes. It's like a test. It's a big test tube, a boat. It's a boat of like these it's like a Far Side. Can you see it? It's like a Far Side cartoon. You have this ark, but inside it's really like this Noah with a white robe, and he's like has all these test tubes, and he's got all these animals in potential and status. Is that the right way to say it?
Stasis.
Stasis. Thank you. I knew there was something wrong there. A stasis, like in a state of like
suspended animation.
That's the one. Suspended. And really, there is a tale here of animation or de-animation and reanimation. Is there such a word as de-animation? Did I just make that up? Is there such a thing?
Google it.
All right. Anyway, I think it makes perfect sense to you. And you know what? I actually turn it to you in a question. I'll form it to you in a question. It says in the beginning that Noach had to bring in the animals, and it says that they came to him. This is chapter 6, verse 20. Yavo elecha. They'll come to you. Right? They'll come to you. But then, way later on, it says, here it is, in chapter 8, verse 17, it says, Hotzeh, but the read of it is, the way it's written is, Heitzeh. One second, the Hotzeh, it says Hotzeh, but it's read Heitzeh, which means, according to Rashi, if they don't want to leave, you got to push them out.
Yeah.
Like they're gonna come in to be saved, but when it's time to come out and live, they may not very well want to come out and live. You're gonna have to reanimate them. What do you think about that?
I mean, from a scientific standpoint, I'm not sure, but I'll tell you what it brings up for me, which is this whole lockdown release paradigm that we've been living through, and that large parts of the world's been living through. Is that it's easier to go in than come out. So that there's something very oddly comforting about crisis. Is that when the whole world's reduced to the walls of the ark, as frightening as that is, as sort of like unreal as the situation may be, you know what needs to be done. Hunker down and survive.
Right.
The challenge is that when you come out, now you have to build a world that was better than the one that preceded it. Otherwise, you don't merit. Meaning, and we know how Noach ends his story. It's a discussion maybe we'll leave for a little bit later, but it's a very heavy burden to know that okay, you may have saved yourself, your family, the animals, but have you really changed the human condition? Because God said that that's kind of built in which case, on some level, you have to ask yourself, where this is all going? And so therefore, there's a reluctance to re-engage with life because there's no guarantees in life. There's no promise of a happy ending. All there is the possibility that you could build something new.
Right. And sometimes through the story of the Ark, I understand also the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, which kind of is like we're saying as religious and Zionistic Jews, we're saying we've come home. This is the third coming. This is it. We're putting down roots in the land of Israel. We're going to build a third temple, and they're like, no, we're still on the journey. Jerusalem is no different than Vienna or Vilnius or Addis Ababa or the Port of Aden or any other place that we've been, or New York City for that matter. We're just still on journey. We're still on the ark. We're like, no, the ark has landed on Mount Ararat, and in this case, our Mount Ararat is Mount Zion.
Moriah.
Right. And we're like, no, this is it. We're landed. We got to come out. They're like, no, we don't come out of the ark because we're still on the ark. And then sometimes a World War II will come around and will push you out of the ark and be like, no, you need to be pushed out. You need to come out. Or maybe as World War II or the Shoah, the Mabul, right? And it still says, no, stay in. But like in the way I see it is, no, it's time to come out and put those roots down in the land. You got to come out and get out of how did we call it?
Stasis.
Not stasis, right? Exactly.
Suspended animation.
Right, and reanimate.
Listen, but there's huge risks, and that's why there's fear around it. Meaning, the seed model, which is kind of the model that you're mapping, that, seeds are incredible. They can survive anything. I mean, you're surely aware of the fact that they've managed to germinate a seed that from Herod's time of this date palm, I think they're calling Methuselah, which is like, fits the Parsha time. But a seed can survive, but a plant in flower is very vulnerable.
Right.
Because that seed rots in the ground. All of its potential is released in building a new life. But if that life itself doesn't achieve fruition, it could be lost forever.
Right.
And so there is a safety in remaining in stasis. The problem is that that's not the purpose of the world.
Right.
But even God, I think, as you introduce it, God could have just said, forget it. Tatzeva libo. It says, he rock, Yetzer Adam, rock, the man's inclination is evil from day one. Forget him. Get rid of them all. But that wasn't the point of creation.
Right.
So even God says, I'll gamble again.
Now God gives the world a chance through Noach, and really it depends on how you want to see Noach. Is the story of Noach a story of destruction of the world, or of actually a second chance for the world? Right? Is it a positive story or a negative story? Is it a story of hate between mankind, or is it a story of the love of the people inside that ark that came together to hold on to the world and then gave the world a second chance, and then themselves, made a family and procreated? Now, I actually have a cat in our house living here, and I closed the door, and it wasn't supposed to come in, and now I see the cat walking around. It's like making a mess down here, messing around with my green screen, and I think to myself, cat, get out, you're being annoying. But then the other side of me thinks, I guess this is your parsha, this is your Torah portion, that you have the right to kind of come in.
I think I see two large cats on the wall behind you there.
Yeah, he's kitty, not now. But anyway, the bottom line is that if you see the green screen move in the background, you'll know who it is. It's a little kitty. But the bottom line is that is it a hopeful Torah portion, or is it a destructive Torah portion?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not so confident that it has to be one or the other. I think that life is more complicated than that, and I think that the children's version of this story about Noah goes on the ark, and there's like the picture you're looking back on, the happy animals and the rainbow over the top, etc., belies the reality of the parsha. That the midrashim add, what's Noah doing while they're on the ark? He's running back and forth trying to feed the animals. He's so late to get to the lion that he takes a chunk out of him, and that it's scary and dangerous and hungry, and they're alone, right? Man and wife are separated. And when he gets out, what does Noah do? He plants a vineyard and gets drunk enough to fall on his face. And yet he saved the world. And God has chosen him and saw him as righteous. Right? And so I just think that the either or there is not in service of the story itself, nor is it in service of the way in which we approach the world. I think part of growing up is recognizing the fact that a story can be both tragic and heroic. It can be about salvation and destruction.
Right. And yet, Noah's Ark has a way of transcending almost all societies. It's famously written in many other religions in different forms, including the famous Gilgamesh story. And so the story of the flood, and it doesn't always have an ark in all the different versions, but in the Jewish version of it, the Bible, the Torah version of it, it certainly has an ark, and that ark is iconic. It has survived, like it's in the public consciousness. There's been many different movies, some better, some worse, that kind of have an image of the ark. But let's make the image of the ark a little bit more complicated. For example, Rashi says that when the things were put on board, one of the things that came on board were the little shadim. How do we call that? Little
demons.
Little demons, yeah. Little demons that are, here it is, umikol chai, from all the living things. This is chapter 6, verse 19. It says, umikol chai. Rashi says, afilu shadim. Even the little demons had that exist in this earth had to make it onto the ark because everything had to be saved. Moreover, the Medrash says that one of the hanger honors to the boat was this giant from this race of giants called Og. And Og is kind of swimming along with the ark, holding onto it while there's a little hole through which Noah feeds, this giant. I always like that image because I think to myself, that image reminds me a little bit of the evil inclination. It's like, okay, you're floating on the world, and somehow we're always keeping this giant thing, like the size of that very ark, we keep this giant thing alive, which is this evil inclination that's always like following us. So in both of those images, and the image that you spoke of before, which is Noah getting drunk later on, there's this element of bad coming with you into the new world.
Yeah, because the ark is not, it's true, it's a messianic story in the sense of salvation that you referenced before. But it's not a messianic story in the sense of redemption. Right. The human condition does not change. Mm-hmm. The nature of the world does not change. So we carry the problems which brought us to the point of the flood with us on the ark, and they come with us out. Right. In many ways, there's a parallel image that the sages developed about Am Yisrael carrying an idol through the splitting of the Red Sea.
Right.
Right. That salvation and redemption are not exactly the same thing. Mm-hmm. And that we wait. Let it be soon. Let it be now. That point where humanity will actually be able to transform. And we can really leave behind the elements of our consciousness, of our behavior, of our society, of our relationships, et cetera, that make our history cyclical. That's that quote they attribute to Mark Twain. The history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. Right? And there are certain ways in which it just kind of seems to be going back and forth. And we're looking at I think a lot of people have a sense today between COVID and politics and social media, blah, 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 all that, right? That we're in one of those couplet moments that like, oh, we've seen this before. And nonetheless, you get a lot of people say, no, it can't happen here. Whatever the it happens to be in that sense can't happen here. No.
So the it, you mean like some kind of destruction or some kind of,
destruction and reordering. Remember the image, this is a creation story. Noah is a creation story. The difference is at the end of the first chapter of creation, we're presented with an orderly universe. Darkness and the deep have been pushed aside. Humanity is crowned upright on dry land, right? Right? You should conquer and rule over it. This is the reverse. Darkness and the deep have been released. All of creation has been reduced to a chip of wood floating on the water, where humanity is racing frantically around inside, just trying to survive. Those are both stories of human experience. And the question is which one do we want to make permanent? Because the chaos, which is the motive force for creation, chaos always precedes creation, has not been removed from existence. It has only been pushed aside.
Right. And chaos is entropy. Chaos is the opposite of what mankind really is supposed to do, which is order things, beautify things, care for things, create things, use matter and time and money and whatever powers and health, whatever powers a person has, creative powers, he is, as Rashi says, like God in the sense that he creates worlds. Like we are supposed to be creators. Again, I like that term procreation in the sense of like,
it's a big theme in this parsha.
Right. What's that?
It's a big theme of this parsha.
That's right. That's right. And yet Lou here asks, I'm putting it up on the screen right now. Lou asks, what lesson should we learn from Noah getting drunk later in his life? Right? So Noah, when he comes out of the ark, he plants a vineyard, turns it into wine, and kind of gets drunk. And take that together with what we said earlier, that Noah's, his name, which is bringing comfort, one of the explanations is that he's a kind of, like you said, John Deere, or a soil scientist, and is bringing.
But you know what John Deere was famous for, right? Can we just clarify that?
Can we remember what is he famous for?
He invented the self-cleaning plow, meaning it's specific. If you look what Rashi says that Noach did, I wasn't just throwing out a random comparison. But anyway, so what's the lesson to be learned there? There's a number of them. The first one that comes up for me is that, like I said, is that salvation is not a neat process. Noach made it, but there were scars that would never heal.
Right.
Right.
So he still brought over the old world, the old darkness from the world before him. And even if he was better than the rest of society, he was still somehow debased by it.
Right, and he understood when God said that the Yetzer Adam rak ra min norav, right, that man's inclination is evil from birth, that was a judgment on the world, and therefore you could ask the question: why have I just done all this? Would it have been better for me not to survive? Right. I think also there is a piece in there of this question, which is rooted in the beginning of the parsha, when it says "Tzadik haya b'dortav," right? That Noach was righteous in his generation. There's a classic debate by our sages whether that means that in his generation he was righteous, but if he'd lived in the time of Abraham, he'd just have been a schlepper, just another guy, or is it even in his generation, he managed to be righteous. And I think that tension exists within Noach, and it might just be that he reached his limit of righteousness.
I think another way there's two more ways that I could see it is one. This is a very modern way of looking at it. There's a bit of PTSD, and sometimes the generation that saves, like the generation that came out of the Holocaust, isn't this generation that is going to bring you. They're going to bring you, as you said before, survival and not salvation. Because they did go through some serious trauma. And so Noah, in a sense, is like traumatized. That's one way of, like a modern way of looking at it. I think another way of looking at it is that, and this is a biblical principle, which is you got to keep being on that journey. There isn't a time in this world where you're like, oh, I survived that, now I can chill. I'm done with the travels and the travails. All right, now I'm on the land, and like I've earned my stripes, and now I can chill and just have that cup of wine and just relax because I did my thing, and now I earned the right to relax. It doesn't work that way, and we learned that from Jacob as well. You got to keep being on the journey, keep being on the path in this lifetime. And so his mistake was that he was like, oh, I did my big task in this world, and God's like, if you're not going up, you're going down, and that's what happened to him. Yeah,
I hear that. I think it's a good one as well. You're having trouble with your camera. I don't know if you're seeing that as well, or it's just
no. What's the problem?
You're pixelated.
I'm pixelated. Oh God.
Or maybe it's just me. You can ask the other listeners, but
I feel fine. But that's what happens when you go virtual. Sometimes you feel fine, but you are in fact pixelated.
But you look marvelous.
I feel marvelous inside, but on the outside, I may not really be myself. I may be, like I'm losing, like it gets like Star Trek-y, you're like you're like I'm not, I'm in some kind of phased moment here. Speaking of phased moments, I have Gabi with me today, okay, and got my son Elazar wanted Gabi to come on the program. If you can't see it, Gabi is a small what are these type of dolls called? I forgot what the name of these. There's a name for these kind of dolls, but anyway, he's a little goat, and he too was a kosher animal. Yes, and me and him have a little bit of similarity. Can you see that? Can you see the similarity? Yeah. And anyway, he made it on the ark, and he's a kosher animal, so he's very happy to be with us here today.
Or at least until he got off the ark and we shecht him for the sacrifices.
He was happy for that as well. Okay, he was
I
happy
knew you
to
were
be
gonna- I
chosen.
knew
He
you were
was
gonna
chosen.
respond that way.
He was chosen. Now I want to say that there are two ways to proceed. This is the Dvar Torah that I gave my kids last night. There are two ways to proceed in this world, in terms of like knowing where true north is, knowing how to what guidance do you get, and that there's one word in this week's Torah portion which teaches us both those ways, and that word is tzohar. Tzohar. The word tzohar has kind of not one meaning. There's more than one way to understand the word tzohar. One way is that it's a window, but another way is that it's a glowing rock.
An orb, if you will.
An orb, right? Something with phosphorescent or with radioactive and luminescence. In simple terms, something that has its own energy. So I tell my kids yesterday, I said to them, that's one of the tensions in this world. On the one hand, you got to look to know where you got to go. You got to look outside. You got to use your eyes, open them wide, and look and see, what are my parents leading me towards? What are my great teachers and rabbis and other teachers leading me towards? Who are great people that I can look towards? And you got to open your eyes. And in fact, I think there's a halacha, there's a Jewish law that you're supposed to have a synagogue with a window. You're supposed to be able to look out into the world. That may have some reference to the ark having to have a window. But I told my kids, on the other hand, the tzohar is not necessarily a window, but sometimes it's that internal energy source, your heart, that tells you what good and bad is, where you should go, and what is your personal energy inside of you, where's it leading you to? And there's a tension between those things. A wise man told me yesterday, when I was at a store, he said to me, where was that? He said to me, the mind leads us to it helps us get rid of 80%. Oh, now I remember who it was. It was a very smart professor named Gershon Bar Kochba in Hebron. We were talking about schools for kids. So he said to me, the mind leads you to be able to cut away about 80% of choices. But then the rest of the 20% of choices, the heart comes in and it says, like, this is the right way. This is the right way. So the mind guides you. What's the mind? The mind has a window onto the world. It's connected to the eyes. It looks. It thinks. It adjudicates. But then at the 20%, you're like, yeah, this would work. This would work. But this, my heart says to me, is the truth. And I said to the kids that they have to learn how to develop both those things. On the one hand, good eyes and looking at others. But on the other hand, listening to yourself and having as Rabbi Jeremy Gimpel says, a lev shomea, a hearing heart, which he quotes Solomon for that. But the point is to understand the tension between those things and to figure out, how to live life. What do you think about the tension between looking out and listening in?
I mean, I think you analyzed it quite well on the personal level. What was coming up from you while you were saying it is the task of Am Yisrael. That we're characterized by Bilam much later. We'll get there in months and months. As Am Levadad Yishkon, right? It's people that dwells alone. There's a certain element that we're supposed to be, Midrash says, Karcha de Kula Bay, where everything comes from within us. We're a city that has all it needs. We don't reach outside. At the same time, we know from our history that adaptation and even assimilation has been one of our primary tools of binding together the pieces of wisdom in every culture that we've encountered. Now, there has to be a balance. Right? We don't want to lose self in our quest for everything that lies outside of us. At the same time, we don't want to be left behind as the world progresses. Mm-hmm. Because even though the Torah is our possession, wisdom is a human inheritance. And there's definitely much to learn outside. And so, if you, as you said, Am Yisrael is the arc of Jewish history, and I like that idea. So then we ourselves are going to be constantly striking this balance. And I would finish by saying is that I think that the only way in which that balance can be maintained in a healthy fashion for us is when we're rooted in our land, but open to the world. Because if we're open to the world when we're not rooted in our land, we know what happens historically. We disappear, we become something which we're not. If we're closed to the world when we're rooted in our land, the siege mentality sets in, and I think we atrophy. I think that both are really necessary.
All right. So to be rooted in the land, you've got to be willing to, again, like have the ark land and be willing to get rooted. We talked about the tension between being rooted and being afloat before. I just want to say, when a tree decides, quote unquote, to put down roots, it's like forever. You can't pack up those roots easily. The only way you could pack up those roots is somebody comes and chops you down. It's not
And they
always
can go
easy
through concrete.
Right. But okay, but it's not easy to like be like, you know what, bad idea. I want to become a seed again and keep going.
No.
You know, and people, God forbid, who have had divorces, know that it's not easy to pack it up again. And you know, the investments that you make are the decisions that you make are oftentimes for the long term, and they are not so easy to pack up again. I only mean to say that I can understand the tension of people who of elements of Jewish society that can't seem to want to put down roots in the land of Israel. They're not ready yet, and I think we have a tension today between Ark and non-Ark Judaism. And I call that difference between Mishkan Judaism, which is tabernacle Judaism, and Mikdash Judaism, which is Jerusalem-based temple Judaism. I think that we have elements of in our society of both, in our broader Jewish society of both. In any case, let's go to the theme of the rainbow for a second. The rainbow is a type of gift where God says, well, I remember the covenant and I won't destroy the world. So on the one hand, it's a happy thing.
It's an oath. Let's use the words of the Torah. It's not a gift per se. It's an oath. It's a sign which embodies a covenant. Mm-hmm. Right? And in that sense, I understand what you mean by gift, in the sense that something which God gave to us. But it's a powerful reminder woven into the fabric of creation that the covenant demands response. It is not a neutral relationship that we've entered into with the Creator.
And so, you know, when you see a rainbow, you're naturally drawn to it, and you're like, that's beautiful. It's funny that Judaism has an ambivalent relationship with the rainbow. And there's a Rashi here, which is a great Rashi, which is chapter 9, verse 12. And it says, this is for generations, forever, is this sign, is this covenant. But then Rashi says, but it's not written fully. That's to tell you that there were generations that didn't need the rainbow because they were better than that. They had great righteous people who were like, if there's this great righteous person, then you don't need the shield of the rainbow. And we're talking, of course, about the generation of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And when he was alive, they never saw a rainbow. Like, he's the rainbow, you know. He's better than the rainbow, or maybe more correctly, there doesn't need to be shown a sign for the rainbow because there's this great man amongst you. And that, I think, also says something about Noach, about how great he was or wasn't, in the sense that they did need a rainbow in his time. They did need a rainbow to show the covenant.
Yeah, and the word I was waiting to hear there is zikaron, is memory. The oaths, right? A brit covenant has two elements to it. There's the contractual, I do X and you do Y, and that's why we've come together. And then there's the sort of unconditional. It's just there's a commitment. You're bound. You're bound. Whether you keep your end of the contract or not, the covenant is binding on us and on God, which is a crazy thing if you think about it. But in order to actualize it in life, you need to remember. Like, that's why it says, it says Vayaban Anan, right? I'm going to put this sign in the clouds, right? When they're upon the land, Venira Keshekan Ba'anan, and that rainbow will appear. V'zacharti et briti asher b'ni b'nechem, and I'm going to remember my covenant. What? God's going to forget? God doesn't forget. And in the same way that God remembers Noach, no, it means that God's going to identify with the nature of humanity and the fact that despite the fact that our inclination is evil from birth, God has entered into a covenant with us in creation not to destroy us again. The same way, we have to remember our obligations to God when we see the rainbow. right? Because we can forget, we can think that we are able to do whatever we want without consequence, or that we can treat the planet however we want without paying the price, right? And in Zechira in Hebrew, it always brings to action. It's a trigger to redemption from God's perspective, and it's a trigger to right action from humans' perspective. So the oaths, I'm just pointing out that when the righteous aren't themselves what saves the world. That maybe yes, maybe no, but in this context, the righteous are what remind us what the world's all about.
Right.
They're the oaths.
Speaking of that, speaking of reminding you what it's all about in the rainbow, as I recall, you usually make a rainbow meal.
Indeed.
Is that happening?
Double rainbow later. Is it happening? Is it happening? What kind of question is that? Are you wearing a rainbow Lego watch all week?
That's it. I'm dedicated to wearing this rainbow watch for the rest of the week. But are you making the traditional rainbow meal?
I am making the traditional rainbow meal. In fact, of late, despite my wife's protest that it's too much work, I've taken to trying to make a double rainbow because I think it's just more fun. Out of the sort of like the salatim course, and then out of the main course. Anybody who's got any thoughts on blue foods that don't involve food coloring, blue, purple, indigo?
I have a thought about it. It's very simple for me, but it might not be actually blue. I don't know. But like, I love frozen blueberries. Me and my daughter Leah, we love frozen blueberries.
Usually try to do it for dessert, although they're not as easy to find as one might like.
Oh no, we have them here at Ramai Levi. There's plenty of frozen blueberries. That's what we call Ramai Levi. And
make a little cobbler, not a bad idea.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, it works. It works. And you put it on some. And but your meals are meat, or I know you're vegetarian. Like.
No. The Rainbow Shabbos is strictly vegetarian, even though, properly speaking, it should be meat, since this is also the parsha in which humanity was given the permission to consume flesh.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Let's talk about flesh for just a second.
I'll meet you there. Just kidding.
There is also an admonition not to spill blood, since the whole predication for the flood is violence between mankind. And so then it says, there's a very karmic, maybe the most karmic of all verses in the Bible. It says, Shofech dam adam, b'adam damoy shofech. This is a very famous, damoy shofech. It's
one of those fun lines in the Bible to say.
Right. It's a kind of an alliteration, and it says, he who spills, a spiller of man's blood, a man shall spill his blood.
By man, his blood shall be shed.
Shall be shed. Let me ask you a question. Right now we have, in Israel, we have this guy named Saib Arakat, Dr. Saib Arakat, who is also a very kind of famous spokesman for the Palestinian Authority. Now, he has had already a lung transplant in Israel, and now is suffering very badly from COVID. Obviously, he's in a high-risk category, and he was on the verge of death a few days ago. He was transferred over to the Israeli hospital at Das and Karim in Jerusalem. Now, the problem with that is that Saib Arakat is also a man who, till very recently, supported BDS, various blood libels against the Jews, including claiming that we're poisoning the wells. He is a well-known embezzler of millions of dollars of European money that was supposed to go to the Palestinian people. And he runs this anti-Jewish and anti-Israel thing called the Palestinian Authority, which has paid millions and millions of dollars to murderers of Jews. And to me, he's like a modern-day Goebbels.
He's an enemy of Israel.
He's an enemy of Israel. And now you have the situation where he's in Israel's care. So, like, there's all this debate out there. One, side says, why should we care for him? And another side says, because he's a human being. And then that's the Jewish thing to do. And then it's not the time to critique the man because he's dying or he's in horrible shape. And other people say, and I myself say, like, okay, let's not talk about the question of should we heal him or not heal him, but we should talk about the question of who this man is and how we should relate to him. They asked me today, they wanted me on TV, but I told them that I have to be on with you. I said they asked me, like, do you believe that he should be taken care of in Israel? I said to them, you know what, that's immaterial. If Israel chooses to heal him, fine. Maybe that's the right thing to do. Maybe not, but whatever. That's not the question. To me, the question is, if they heal him, they should throw him immediately into jail afterwards. That's the issue. The issue is like I'm not like going to talk about whether they should be harsh or not harsh. It's just not interesting to me. What
I wouldn't throw him
interesting
in
to me
jail.
is,
I would start a massive media campaign. You're welcome, Sahib Erekat.
right.
The man
So
whose very
right,
life depends on Israeli generosity, and just keep throwing his hypocrisy in his face, because
right.
this is a man who also is part of an organization that has prevented his own citizens from receiving aid in this situation.
Right.
And the moral question there, I think, is there's the abstract moral question. I think is real. Taking the stance to save the blood of your enemies is not a simple decision. You can take a utilitarian question. Hey, you're spending all the money and energy on this guy when there are sort of other people who could be saved. But in the end of the day, I stand behind the general stance within Israeli society is we don't want to be those people. We're going to save lives. We might save lives and throw the guy in jail, like you said, or put him on trial. But we don't want to enter into those sort of moral cheshbonot, those equations, not because of the right or wrong, because it's not going to make us who we want to be. But I think your response is the correct one. And if we really want to be who we want to be, though, we can't pretend that he's not our enemy.
Right.
Right.
I mean, Rav Mike, what would you say to Saul, King Saul, if he would have said like, well, but we don't want to be those people. It's true, I just slaughtered all of those people, but like the king, I got to give him some respect. Or in this case, it's like, oh yeah, the average Palestinian could never get into, a COVID-suffering average Palestinian will either go to a Palestinian hospital or Jordanian hospital, probably not enter a Jerusalem hospital. Home. Right, or suffer at home. But this guy who's the kingpin of this whole organization that sends money to terrorists, this whole like system that he's part of creating. Well, yeah, but he's a big guy, so therefore he should survive.
You're raising another piece there, which is in whose interest is it that he received that treatment? And this is a perhaps uncomfortable topic for a lot of people, but the reality is within our own leadership, there's a vested interest in other leaders. It's just bad for business when people in power are taken out of power, no matter if they're your enemies or your friends.
Right.
And there's a lot in common that leadership, even across the divide of combat, have with one another that they don't have with the average person. And all these people wishing Saib Erekat well out there, I think might have more in common with him than they have with you and I. This is a larger question,
right? That's definitely that's definitely part of the equation of the political class. But in any case, it's definitely a moment where this guy is laying in an Israeli hospital, but not only is he dying or whatever or suffering and is very, very ill, but I think that it's not a coincidence that he, Hanan Ashrawi, Mahmoud Abbas himself, this whole generation of these guys is aging. Some of them are ill. But I think also it stands also for the aging and the illness of the two-state solution, which is itself on life support. And there's
being kept alive by us.
Right. By the way, I want to tell you, Rav Mike, I asked a simple question, which is like everybody's talking about the Jewish position on Saib Erekat. What about the so-called Palestinian position? What about the Arabs on the street? I haven't seen any prayers, any protests, any gatherings in mosques.
It's hard for me to believe he's a beloved person.
Right. We all know what they actually think of him. Because poll after poll has shown that they despise them and what they've done to their society. So to me, it's like we're all asking what's the moral thing for Israel to do? But what about the Arabs themselves? How do they see this person?
But this goes to the point I was making before, is that one of the reasons that the two-state solution still exists, one of the reasons that the Palestinian Authority maintains any legitimacy in the eyes of political classes across the world, is that we created them because we need them. Right, and whether you say we need them because you're a pragmatist, so-called, and say we have to have a partner for peace, or whether it's because you're so lacking in vision and courage to follow through on the Jewish project that you'd rather hand off half of it to a foreign people, or anything in between. We created them because we need them, and therefore the reason that Saib Erekat is receiving life support, literally, within our hospital systems, the same reason that the Palestinian Authority is receiving life support, is that we don't want to face life without them. They fulfill a need for us.
Right. Right. Sometimes you just don't want to come out of the ark. You just don't want to come out of the ark. You just you feel safer in the ark, whatever its tight walls are. At least they're familiar.
I want to just give you a little teaser now on that note, and then I'll let you go. Is that either tomorrow or Sunday, depending on whether God graces me with the time, I'm making an episode in the first of the post-67 Israel response, and I've got some incredible thoughts from Natan Alterman. So I want you to make sure you tune in, and when you do, think about the conversation we just had. I'll just be
and that's teaser. On your other show called The Jewish Story.
That's right.
Which is found at jewishstory.co or here at the Land of Israel Network, and also at your new website, which is ravmike.com.
That's right.
Okay, very, very good. Very easy to find. No problem. Do we have another minute? Or what do we have? Are we out of time?
No. Take a minute or two.
Yeah, so let's just talk about the last, which is something that is a little close to me in the sense that I remember I was in Manhattan, in New York City, when the Twin Towers went down, September 11th. And I'll never forget the thought that I had that this is connected. I thought that at that moment that this is connected somehow to the story of the Tower of Babel, the Tower of Babel, that got taken down by God when society decided that they could use science to kind of defeat God. And I think there's a real tension there between like the idea that science can defeat God or God can defeat science, and the thing we discussed last week about Nietzsche. And so here you have a group of a society that wants to become famous, have a name, hold on to this earth by scientific strength, by the ability to build. Kind of everybody in that society also turns corporate. People lose their identity, but they're part of this like together project. So there's something nice about it.
They become bricks in the wall.
They become bricks in the wall. They literally become bricks in the wall, according to the Midrash. For those who fell, they don't matter anymore as individuals. But there's this grand effort, and that grand effort is one in which there's beauty in that it's united. But there's something not beautiful about it, because it instead of being united in the worship of God, it's united in its challenge to God, and it's not spiritual. It's scientific, and it's triumphantalism. Okay, it's a type of triumphant human society can better all things and overcome all obstacles. If we just huddle together and use our scientific knowledge, we can defeat the challenges of this world. Comes God and kind of, he doesn't slay them, he doesn't kill them, he just confuses them, confounds them, separates them to their different parts, and therefore puts an end to this cooperation, this corporate cooperation that didn't have a spiritual root at its heart.
Yes, and the big difference is, of course, that the Torah's vision of unity is harmony and not homogenization. Mm-hmm. Right? That humanity can indeed can gain strength through reducing individuality. It's what you're describing, right? Whereas the Torah's vision is that the great strength of humanity is reflecting the diversity which is built into creation and finding a way in which we as individuals can work together. And that's why the image, right, that I'm sure we've spoken about in the past, of Evan Masu Abonim, right, that beautiful line that's in the Psalms that makes it as part of our sort of Psalms of specific praise and Hallel, right, the stone that the builders refused has become the head cornerstone. The Midrash says that stone's Avraham. Why? Because he doesn't fit. He's not a brick that you can just easily lay one on top of the other. And anybody who's ever known a Jew knows that that's kind of a characteristic of a deeply Jewish aspect. We just don't seem to fit. And when we get along, when you put us all in this country together, oy vavoy, right? It's like we can't seem to fit with each other. It's and on one hand, that's frustrating and it's maddening and it's dangerous. And I do wish sometimes we could get along a little bit more. We're willing to put aside our individuality for a little bit of our common practice. But ultimately, me'et Hashem haitazot. right? This is from God. Why? Because we're all created in the image of God, which means that no two of us are alike. And if we're going to harness the power of humanity in service of our greatness, then it also has to be in service of that image of God within us, which can never be a homogenizing force. Harmony, not homogenization, is the Torah's vision.
Okay, all right. The tower came down, and that's what I saw in September 11th, and I thought to myself, this is a moment of this could be a moment of a great awakening of American Jewry, and just in general. Like, I thought the world would kind of shape up into a different place. It didn't exactly happen. We have a world today which is again in some kind of maelstrom, the sense or deluge. There's the sense of the American elections being very up in the air and a very intense moment, and just in general. And yet through that, I think that through the messiness of our time, just like at the end of the Torah portion of Noach, where we're introduced to Abram, the kind of the Abraham 1.0 before he becomes Abraham, right? I have to say that in this world right now of corona, of politics, of social media, and all this this kind of vicissitude, this mess, the one thing that actually I think is coming out here, which is an incredible light, is the Abraham Accords. So I think there's a relationship. Like right now, there is a beautiful thing that's coming out in this crazy time, which is Abraham. Oh, I forgot to mention, Prime Minister Netanyahu, indictment. By the way, happy birthday, Prime Minister Netanyahu. Today's his 71st birthday. But there's all this stuff that is trying to shake the foundations, and yet through this time, like Abraham, a light starting to shine in this world, and that's, I think, the Abraham Accords. So I'm very excited about this time, and I really think that the Arab world is beginning a turn to come around towards Israel, towards brotherhood, and I do think that there's a great moment within all of this. And and my wife says to me, like, are you drinking the Kool-Aid, or have you become totally like? I'm like, yeah, I think there's something great happening here. I really do. And I'm a believer that this is a beginning of a new time, and more Arabs will come around saying, hey, Jews are our cousins. Let's stop this war. Let's stop these lies. Let's get together and start working together towards a better Middle East. And at the same time, as there's this Abraham Accords light, there's the ensuing death of the two-state solution and its representatives. So I think that something good is happening. Hamas is basically being wiped out. See that? It's in the Torah portion. Hamas is, and that whole world is being wiped away, and Abraham is coming in. What do you think about that? That's a lot of themes being tied in there.
Bezrat Hashem. I hope that we merit to see it in our day.
Amen. Rav Mike Feuer, thank you so much for joining us. Shabbat Shalom. I'm only a shtickle jealous that I don't get the opportunity to taste from your rainbow meal. Okay, and I want everybody to write me an email, yishai@yishaifleischer.com, or what's an email for you, Rav Mike?
RavMikeFeuer@gmail.com.
RavMikeFeuer@gmail.com with your ideas for how to make or any elements of a rainbow meal. So
especially the blue, indigo, violet.
That's right. Okay, there's a missing color there. So we're very excited about that. Rav Mike, thank you so much for joining me, and again, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
All right, folks, you are listening to Yishai Fleischer Show, and it's so great to be with you. And we do have some fabulous and wonderful. First thing, let me put up this banner here. This is Noah's Floating Genetic Lab with Rav Mike and Rabbi Yishai. And I want to say to you that we have some great folks that make the show happen, our sponsors. First, check out blessedbyisrael.com. All over the world, you can have products from the land of Israel. Wouldn't that be really fun for you to have a product from the land of Israel, like an olive oil or other things? So go to blessedbyisrael.com, put in a coupon code Yishai, get 12% off. I know already a lot of people, there's been a few $100s in sales at Blessed by Israel, and you can also really enjoy it and bless Israel and be blessed by Israel. Blessedbyisrael.com. Great Jewish news and great Jewish and Israel content at jewishpress.com. They feature the Yishai Fleischer Show prominently, so thank you very much. Check out also natural goodness from the Holy Land at Salves of Jerusalem, salvesofjerusalem.com. I use it. I used it this morning, and they're really great and organic, and they'll make you glow. That's right. They don't have a brand like that yet, but I think they should have Moses Glow skin care products at Salves of Jerusalem. They don't have that yet, but they have other stuff that's really good. Check it out, salvesofjerusalem.com. Of course, the Jewish community of Hebron it will continue to survive, but it needs your help to continue to survive well, and you'll be blessed through helping the Jewish community of Hebron, which is the Tomb of the Fathers and Mothers. That's hebronfund.org. And Techelet, Tekhelet, that's the biblical blue string that's back. After 2,000 years of hibernation, it's back. You can have it yourself. Coupon code Yishai will get you percentage points off. That makes a difference. And, of course, YishaiFleischer.com. Your help is always appreciated. Thank you so much to Moshe Herman and to Tabitha and to Ben Bresky and to Yocheved for getting the show out to the world and all the good work that you guys do. So help us keep this show going out to the world widely and freely. And also, of course, thelandofisrael.com. The Land of Israel Network is a fabulous podcast, Israel podcast network for you. So we've got a lot of friends out there, and I want to wish you a Shabbat Shalom and lots of blessings from the Land of Israel. Share this podcast or video with your friends. Let me know if you need any changes or anything to happen. Much appreciated, much obliged, and lots of love from the land of loving, really, the land where God's eyes are on it from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And, of course, it's a land of blessings. When you're connected to it, you are blessed. The story of the Jewish people, the Torah, and the Land of Israel, they come together and bring you blessings when it's part of your life. My recommendation is have a picture of the Land of Israel in your house. Drink a bottle of wine or a bottle of soda pop or a soft drink from the Land of Israel. Just plain water. It's really an absolute blessing to be part of this great time and this great story. So lots of love, and I'll see you soon, and shalom.